Teal dear, this is going to be an interesting one. You know how the sock-just femmes of the internet like to tell us that gender is a social construct? Well, here we have one who seems to think that biological sex is also a social and medical construct. To me, this video somewhat personifies the phrase, "a little knowledge is a dangerous thing," where we have someone who clearly knows a little bit about biology, certainly a little bit more than the average layperson, almost as if they've achieved level 1 understanding. And then they've come to all of these wacky and outrageous conclusions that sound really good based on this marginally elevated level of understanding of biology, but is completely and utterly destroyed as soon as you find out anything further on the subject. So this is going to be a rather interesting video, and actually somewhat a difficult one, because I'm going to be walking a very fine line between having to go through a lot of material so that everyone can understand what's going on, but at the same time keeping it as simple as possible, so that I don't end up producing a 2 or 3 hour long response to something which is only about 4 minutes long in total. So today we're going to be delving into genetics, sexual reproduction, and genetic disorders. Off you go, JJ.
Hi, JJTalkz.
You've nicknamed your audience Genitals. Alright, it's your channel, not gonna judge. Maybe I should start calling my subscribers Herpes and see how well that works.
I'm back. I'm so sorry for that minor speed bump in my YouTube channel. That was strange. I'm feeling better now.
Yeah, I'm just gonna skip the first couple of minutes of this, because it's just bullshit vlogger, "Oh my god, I'm so sorry, I haven't updated you for like a day." No one gives a shit about your vapid narcissism. Let's actually get into the topic.
But anyway, since I am back, let's dive right on into the medical and social invention of biological sex. So, this video is directed towards people who are already kind of understanding that gender is a social construct, but maybe aren't sold or haven't thought about the idea that biological sex is also a social construct.
If you want to go absolute full postmodernist bullshit mode, which I imagine you do, then technically it is, since a load of people had to socially agree on how we're going to signify things, what words and terms we're going to use to describe certain things, and so on and so forth. But this is a pretty weak source bullshit argument, which basically ends up resulting in the pseudo-intellectual whining of, "Prove to me the universe exists."
I might make a video about gender later, but this is for people who already are kind of aware. I hear a very simplistic kind of cis-splaining comment sometimes that explains trans people as gender is how you feel and how you identify, and biological sex is your body. And while this is, I guess, a good place to start for a lot of people, it's very simplistic, it needs a little bit of work.
Well, no, it doesn't really need a little bit of work. That's actually what it is. Your biological sex is determined by what your body is doing, and a variety of physical parameters around it which are very objectively measurable. And we'll get into those shortly.
I often see some social justice light people get a little bit nervous when I talk about biological sex being a social construct, because they're like, you're pushing it, you're sounding crazy.
Maybe you should take that as a hint.
But just hear me out.
I'd rather not, but okay.
What are things that we as a society use to determine what someone's biological sex is?
I find it very interesting that you've now shifted to, what do we as a society use? It's an irrelevancy what you think society uses. What matters is what medical science uses.
And yes, there are multiple factors, which is problematic because I'm going to talk about 5 categories that we use.
No, you mean 5 words that you use that you think are categories. The things that you refer to here are actual sort of medical terms, but you're just trying to use them as if they're categories for deciding gender or sex because reasons.
And obviously, if there's 5 different categories and people can have different aspects of different categories, how can we call them one thing? How can there only be 2 sexes? It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't work.
See, this is where I can already tell that you have this understanding that's slightly above that of a layperson, but you don't actually really understand what's going on. Because the 5 things that you list aren't 5 individual traits. They're actually 5 things that overlay each other quite a lot. As a feminist, I'm sure you're aware of the term intersectional. Well, these 5 categories that you label intersect with each other a hell of a lot. In fact, if we take the 5 different categories, as you call them, and we put them all onto a Venn diagram of how they all link together to form a person, they would form more or less a circle. And this will become abundantly clear once we start going into the material in this video surrounding chromosomes, meiosis, and genetic inheritance.
Because people can have male, 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 stereotypically, and then female, female. What are we going to call them? So these 5 categories are karyotypes, genitalia, ability to reproduce, hormones, and secondary sex characteristics. Let's start by talking about genitalia. Ooh, yes, most men, and I'm just saying men and women for sake of argument, and I'm talking about biological sex, cis people, sorry for this, but most men, yes, have the obvious penis, testes. Most women have the obvious clitoris, vagina. Fine. But what about people that are born with variations of these organs? There are plenty of people who have sometimes both of these organs, sometimes in between, sometimes developing in different directions, sometimes neither. There are people with uteruses that don't have periods. There are people with testes who don't produce sperm, and ovaries that don't produce gametes.
Okay, I'm actually kind of annoyed at the order that you do these things, because you would have been far better off addressing karyotypes first, since that's the genetic information that informs everything that you cover in this video. So, seeing as you won't do it, I'm going to do it for you, and then I'm going to come back to address this idea of people having genitals that are in between and developing in different directions, whatever the hell that's supposed to mean. So I suppose a trigger warning for you, Ms. Talks. Prepare to have the human genome and reproduction mansplained to you in the quickest and dirtiest way possible. Obviously, I'm not going to cover every single tiny little nuance to the entire event, because I'd be here for hours, but I believe it will still suffice for the purpose of this video. Let's start off with the basic fundament. What is a person? The answer is quite simple. This is a person. What you're looking at here is the 23 pairs of chromosomes that are found within the cells of a human. You'll notice there's 22 pairs, and then in the small box to the bottom right there are the sex chromosomes, which is the 23rd pair, which gives us the biological XX female or XY male. Now, the obvious question to ask is, why do we have 23 pairs of chromosomes, totaling 46 chromosomes in all? And the answer is quite simple. It's sexual reproduction. 23 of your chromosomes come from your biological mother, and 23 of your chromosomes come from your biological father. Now, that all sounds well and good in theory, but you might be looking at it and thinking, well, hang on, each adult has 46 chromosomes. How is it that the reproductive cells that they pass on only have 23? Excellent question, and the answer is a process called meiosis. Meiosis, not to be confused with mitosis, is a specialized form of cell division which reduces the number of chromosomes in a cell by half. And this is the process by which the reproductive cells in humans are created, the sperm in a man and the eggs in a woman. Now, meiosis is quite a complex process, which I'm not going to go into massive detail on, because I would be here for hours. Put as absolutely simply as possible, it basically happens in 2 phases. The first is a crossover phase, which basically mixes up the alleles of your original 2 chromosomes, and then there is the second phase, which finally splits them into individual gametes. Like I said, I'm not going to go into any more detail on it than that, because it is a very, very lengthy process to try and explain. But in essence, the crossover before the split basically just ensures maximum genetic diversity between gametes, thus increasing into the tens of thousands the unique genetic makeup of each egg and each sperm. The entire point of this process is to ensure that each gamete has an equal amount of genetic material. That way, if or when that gamete meets up with one of another person, they are both fertile and contain the optimum amount of genetic data, that is, the optimum number of chromosomes, to form a new person. And this is medically, objectively, how this process is supposed to work. This is why, when this process doesn't work as intended, more often than not, the result is either going to be an aborted fetus, an adult with some sort of condition or syndrome, usually infertile. And when I say most of the time aborted fetus and usually infertile, we are talking like 99% of cases. So this idea that people are supposed to have 23 pairs of chromosomes is objectively, medically, how a human is supposed to be born. And then the genetic variation within those chromosomes is what gives us the wonderful diversities of people that we have around the world today, and is why we all have different coloured eyes, different coloured hair, different coloured skin, are born with all kinds of genetic differences. Predisposition to height, rates of hair growth, numbers of nerves in the brain and body detecting things like how you taste things, how you feel things, how you smell things, so on and so forth. So what happens when this process goes wrong? Where instead of a 46 chromosome cell splitting down into a series of 23 chromosome cells, something goes wrong. What happens is a process called non-disjunction. And to give you a really simple diagram of it, non-disjunction looks something like this. As you can see, one of these gametes has twice the amount of genetic material that it should have, and one of them has nothing. Poor little guy. And the result when these become fertilized looks something like this. The example on the left is a condition known as trisomy, which is simply having 3 chromosomes. And any of the number of chromosomes can be affected by trisomy. For example, you can have trisomy of chromosome 23, giving a person the chromosomes XXX, XXY, or XYY, which result in a variety of syndromes which we'll discuss later in this video. Or you can have trisomy of other numbers, such as trisomy of chromosome 21, which produces a condition that I'm sure we're all familiar with, known as Down syndrome. And the example on the right results in something known as monosomy, where a certain number of chromosome only exists containing 1 instead of the pair, which again results in a variety of medical conditions that we will talk about later in this video. And doing some quick, dirty napkin maths will tell you why trisomy and monosomy usually result in people who are infertile. And it's simply because they do not have the correct amount of genetic material. They do not have the right amount of chromosomes for them to split appropriately to produce fertile eggs or fertile sperm, which of course makes the assumption that those individuals are able to produce eggs or sperm in the first place, which often they can't. But if they could, it would then often take another stage of non-disjunction in their own gamete production to then produce a cell with the appropriate 23 chromosomes to fertilize another person, or be fertilized by another person. So it's very, very unlikely. I do believe that is the quickest, dirtiest outline of human genetics and reproduction that I have ever given in my life. And that was by no means exhaustive by any stretch of the imagination. There is still plenty of other stuff going on that I have not even touched on. But hopefully we're all now kind of on the same page regarding genetics, chromosomes, and karyotypes. So finally, with all of that out the way, we come to what this girl is talking about, which is hermaphroditism, which in modern times has been rebranded under the word intersex. As we've already covered by simply looking at how genetics is supposed to work objectively, there is very much supposed to be an absolute XX female, XY male. However, sometimes that doesn't happen. In humans, conditions that involve discrepancies between external genitalia and internal reproductive organs are described by the term intersex. Intersex conditions are sometimes also referred to as disorders of sexual development. Such conditions are extremely rare in humans. In true gonadal intersex, or true hermaphroditism, an individual has both ovarian and testicular tissue. The ovarian and testicular tissue may be separate, or the two may be combined in what is called an ovatestis. Affected individuals have sex chromosomes showing male-female mosaicism. where one individual possesses both the male XY and female XX chromosome pairs. Most often, but not always, the chromosomal complement is 46XX, and in every such individual there also exists evidence of Y chromosome material on one of the autosomes, any of the 22 pairs of chromosomes other than the sex chromosomes. Individuals with a 46XX chromosome complement usually have ambiguous external genitalia, with a sizable phallus, and therefore often reared as males. However, they develop breasts during puberty and menstruate, and in only rare cases actually produce sperm. In 46XX intersex, female pseudohermaphroditism, individuals have male external genitalia, but the chromosomal constitution and reproductive organs of a female. In 46XY, male pseudohermaphroditism, individuals have ambiguous or female external genitalia, but the chromosomal constitution and reproductive organs of a male, though the testes may be malformed or absent. So what this should tell you is that these intersex individuals, these hermaphrodites, these people who may have both kinds of reproductive organs or be somewhere in between, this is a genetic malformation, a genetic abnormality, caused as the result of a sperm or egg that came from a cell that did not divide properly, due to an error in the process of meiosis. And it may sound horrible referring to this as a genetic abnormality, but I really do not intend it to be. Because people who have these conditions, obviously they're no less of a person as a result of it, by no means whatsoever. But it's very important for people to realize that people who are born with extra chromosomes, say on the gender chromosome, have a genetic abnormality, and that genetic abnormality usually leads to sterility, among a whole host of other problems. And I don't just say problems as in things that are problematic, I mean problems as in things that are legitimate medical issues. Again, we'll come to these later. Trying to do what this girl is doing and spare their feelings by being all like, oh no, you're just a third gender or a fourth gender. Everyone else is weird, and anyone who tells you otherwise is just wrong. This doesn't help, because all you are doing is massively misinforming people about how genetics and reproduction work. And sorry, JJ, but there is a very objective way that genetics and reproduction are supposed to work. And what you are doing is pointing at the 1% of abnormalities and saying that this disproves the rule. And unfortunately, that ain't how it works. Anyway, I believe that's given us a good enough grounding on genetics and karyotypes, and hopefully covered for you why the concept of an intersex person doesn't make them some mystical third gender, or some kind of third or fourth biological sex. So I think we can finally move on.
What about people with complete, partial, or mild androgen insensitivity syndrome?
Androgen insensitivity syndrome does not make someone not biologically male. They still have an absolute and very definite XY chromosome. All that happens is that their body basically lacks the receptors to appropriately process various male hormones. Now, depending on how severe this is, the person may very well look like a boy, but quite simply not go through puberty, because their body is insensitive. Or if the insensitivity is quite severe, and really affected them in utero, then it's very possible that even though they are genetically male, they may not have developed a penis or testicles. And the reason for this is because males and females share the same basic genital components, simply extrapolated out into two different forms, and that extrapolation is informed by what hormones the fetus is subjected to. Which brings me on to a pet peeve of mine when people say that all fetuses start life as female. It's simply not true. The reality is that the basic default fetus is kind of somewhere in between male and female anyway. It's just the hormone exposure that it is given that determines male or female, and that hormone exposure is determined by the chromosomes that the fetus has. Put very simply, anyway. But here's a short video which demonstrates this process for you a little more graphically.
At around 7 weeks, your baby's internal sex organs, such as ovaries and testes, begin to form in the abdomen. Male and female sex organs and genitalia look the same at this stage because they're derived from the same structures. At around 9 weeks, boys and girls begin to develop differently. In girls, a tiny bud emerges between the tissue of the legs. This bud will become the clitoris. The membrane that forms a groove below the bud separates to become the labia minora and the vaginal opening. By 22 weeks, the ovaries are completely formed and move from the abdomen to the pelvis. They already contain a lifetime supply of 6 million eggs. In boys, the bud develops into the penis and starts to elongate around 12 weeks. The outer membrane grows into the scrotal sac that will later house the testicles. By 22 weeks, the testes have formed in the abdomen. They already contain immature sperm. Soon they'll begin the descent to the scrotum, but it's a long journey. They'll reach their destination late in pregnancy or, for some boys, after birth.
Yeah, well, these people have XY chromosomes like male, right? Except they don't develop male sex characteristics or genitalia. And this can either be fully, completely, they don't, or just partially, a little bit. And a lot of times they don't find out that they are XY until they hit puberty.
But none of these facts mean that this person is some third biological sex.
There are so many versions of human genitalia that nature has designed that it cannot fit into these two male-female boxes. It just can't.
Nature didn't design anything. That's not how evolution works. Successful things propagate their own success, and things that are less successful fall by the wayside. But I'll forgive you this turn of phrase because it may simply just be how you've chosen to say it. But again, the slight different formation of male or female genitals does not make someone a third biological sex. Does a congenital micropenis make a male not a male, for example? Let's extrapolate your basic thought process out to another function of the human body. Let's say eyesight. And we're comparing someone who is born with normal vision, someone who is born blind in both eyes, and someone who is blind in only one eye. Are you going to sit there and tell me that, oh, there's just so many ways that nature designed humans to be able to see, we can't possibly say that one is the best or correct way? No, we absolutely can, because we know that that is how a certain part of the body is supposed to function. Every part of the human body basically has a small range of operation capacity, as it were. Such as between here and here is normal, and anything outside of this is considered to be abnormal and probably needs to have something done with it because it will be dangerous to your health, or may impair your ability to live what many people would term as a normal life. Again, this is in no way a case that there is a third biological sex, or indeed any other number of biological sexes.
What about someone's karyotype? Is that the point that defines what biological sex they are? XX or XY? But what if they're XY and have CAAS, like I mentioned earlier, and don't develop the male genitalia? What if they're XXX? What if they're XXY? What if they're XO? Guys, there's just way too many variations on chromosomes as well for there to be two binary sexes.
You see, this is why I went through all that karyotype stuff earlier. Yes, the XXXY is absolutely what we use to determine whether someone is male or female. The existence of trisomy of the 23rd chromosome, again, does not turn someone into a third gender or a third biological sex. And neither does monosomy make someone a third gender or a third biological sex. If we wanted to extrapolate your logic out to its rational conclusion, then you would be implying that people with Down syndrome are in some way a new gender or a new sex or some different kind of person, as opposed to calling it what it is, a genetic disorder. There's a couple more points that I'd like to make here, but I'm actually going to wait until your next point to make them because, as I said at the start of this video, So many of these points are very, very closely linked, because pretty much everything you go through is actually informed by the person's chromosomes. So, keep going.
What about the ability to reproduce? I shouldn't even have to argue this.
Yeah, doing this whole I shouldn't even have to explain this sort of thing to you is just a really cheap cop-out way of saying that even you don't understand the point that you're trying to make.
There are many people, women, with uteruses that cannot reproduce. There are plenty of men with testes that cannot reproduce.
And this fact does not make them biologically not male or biologically not female. And while we're on the topic of reproduction, and take it back to your previous point a little bit, the entire point of there being two human sexes is to ensure genetic diversity. It is the very basis of the action of evolution. Multiple populations with multiple different traits, ensuring that they can adapt to whatever environmental changes may arise. And pretty much the best way of ensuring that your genes get passed on is to be fertile. And when we consider people such as the XXYers, better known as Klinefelter syndrome, one of your third biological sexes, as you seem to be reporting them, is that they are unable to produce sperm and are sterile. Turner syndrome, which is monosomy of the 23rd chromosome, resulting in someone having only the X chromosome. Again, one of the major problems that they will have is infertility, along with numerous other problems. From a simple evolutionary perspective, if you, as a biological sex, are mostly sterile, that is pretty much the worst way imaginable of ensuring your species' survival. This should kind of be a tip for you that this is not how things are supposed to work. And even if we ignore conditions affecting the sex chromosome for a minute, and we just talk about whether women being able to reproduce and men being able to reproduce, and this somehow changes their biological sex, or means that biological sex is a social construct, or whatever bullshit point it is you're trying to make, does this mean that a woman who goes through menopause is no longer genetically a woman? Or a man who, say, has his testicles removed is no longer genetically a man? This is basically the point that you're making, and it's absurd.
What about hormones and secondary sex characteristics? I shouldn't even have to explain this one.
Yeah, there we go again with the, oh, I shouldn't even have to explain this. You really should. If you are trying to convince someone that your position is correct, you need to be as detailed and as thorough in your explanations as you can be. The fact that you resort to, oh, well, I shouldn't even have to, just proves that you don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
Not all men are strong, deep-voiced, hairy, smelly, androgen-filled, and not all women are small, weak, high-pitched voiced, and full of estrogen. Also, there are plenty of men who develop breasts, or some breast tissue at least. There's so much variation that we see constantly: men with high-pitched voices, women with facial hair, and more upper body strength.
Yeah, you see, you really didn't even make a point there at all, so I guess I'm going to instead. Secondary sex characteristics are basically post-puberty traits that men have and that women have. They differ from primary sexual characteristics, and the things that we've been talking about throughout most of this video have been the primary sexual characteristics. That is the, do they have a penis? Do they have a vagina? Do they have testicles? Do they have ovary? Do they have an XX chromosome or an XY chromosome? And so on and so forth. Secondary sex characteristics are characteristics that develop in a person as a result of their primary sex characteristics, which is why they are always observed after puberty. These include things such as the development of body hair in both sexes, the development of facial hair in men, along with the deepening of the voice and the enlargement of the muscles, and in women the more rounding and softening of the features, the development of breasts, the widening of the hips, and the increase in overall body fat tissue. These characteristics are developed as a result of the hormones within that person's body. And what determines which hormones are released and in what amounts? That would, of course, be your genetics. You know, those pesky little chromosomes that we've been speaking about for about half an hour now. And when I say that, I mean that having an XY chromosome will encourage your body to release androgen hormones, such as testosterone, and that having an XX chromosome will encourage your body to release the female hormones, such as estrogen and progesterone. But there are external factors that can contribute to how much or how little of those hormones are released: diet, lifestyle, exercise, etc. Just because a woman develops smaller breasts than other women doesn't mean she's suddenly not biologically a woman. Just because a man has a more patchy beard than another man, that doesn't mean that he is suddenly less biologically male. There are so very many factors in deciding how your secondary sex characteristics develop that the idea of being able to put them as any sort of indication of what someone's biological sex is absurd. The baseline of which ones someone will have the capability of developing is determined by genetics. How much or how little those characteristics then actually manifest is often down to other causes, such as environment, diet, exercise, and so on. See, this is why you were all like, oh, I shouldn't even have to explain it, because you don't have a clue what the hell you're talking about. And again, you're kind of talking about this nebulous 1% who don't follow what the 99% generalization is, and then claiming that that 1% means that the 99% is wrong and needs to go away forever. The exception does not invalidate the rule.
The overall point with karyotypes, genitalia, hormones, and secondary sex characteristics defining someone's biological sex is one, problematic because there's way too many categories that people don't fit into exactly.
Only you and other postmodernist morons like you are the kind of people attempting to put people into all of these 5 categories. Medically speaking, we look for Y chromosomes, basically. Absence of a Y chromosome makes the person female, whether they are XO, XX, XXX, XXXX, or XXXXX. Presence of a Y chromosome, whether it's XY, XYY, XXY, or XXYY, denotes male. It's basically that simple, and then everything else is informed and worked out from that point onwards. From a strictly medical, scientific standpoint anyway. That's before we start touching the psychological side of things like gender dysphoria, which is a whole other kettle of fish.
2, nature designs us
no it doesn't.
in such a way that it's just not possible to fit us into a binary, a specific whole. Nature's gonna make people that have in-between genitalia, or that cannot reproduce, or that are XXX or XXY or XO. That's just how we are. You're not gonna have all men with deep voices and all women with high-pitched voices. That's just not how it's gonna work. And most of the population does not fit into these 5 categories perfectly.
You are the only person using these 5 categories. Everyone else scientifically is only concerned about the presence of X chromosomes or Y chromosomes.
Nature doesn't care about delineating male and females perfectly. That's not how it works.
This is the only statement in this video so far you've made that is actually kind of true. And it's only true because genetic diversity is a thing, and it is in fact the thing that has made human beings the most successful species on the planet. I do enjoy the fact that the only thing you have said in your video that is actually correct is only kind of correct by accident, because you probably didn't even realize what you've just said.
Alright guys, I've got some links below, especially to a book called The Medical Invention of Sex, which is written by this doctor, and I really like. She's basically explaining on everything that I'm saying. It's really, really good. You should take a look. Maybe, perhaps, I'll leave some more links below. Also, I will see you guys tomorrow for Advice Wednesday. Oh my god. Fuck bitches, get money, save animals.
Oh, well, at least we're at the end of that load of bullshit. Also, I'd just like to ask, what the fuck was with the retarded baby music playing in the background throughout the entire time you were talking? Is it supposed to be some neoteny, oh, look at me, I'm so cute and girly and something, whatever? Or is it just something to compliment the age at which your education ceased? I guess I should do some sort of witty sign-off message here, but honestly, what I've just witnessed has kind of killed my urge to live. So, go away.